Hello Internet, and welcome to Tech-Xample. Today we're looking at a personal favorite of mine, the Radeon VII. As the final flagship GPU of GCN, the Radeon VII has earned itself a bit of a cult following, owing in no small part to its absolute stunning reference design. No, seriously, AMD, why haven't you made other cards this nice looking? And its near mythical rarity, especially at the time of its release, where it was a unicorn. An expensive unicorn. At that, costing an eye-watering $700, matching that of its main competitor, the RTX 2080. While it does have a storied history, the culmination of a near decade of GCN refinement, improvement, and failures, is it worth a $200-ish price when used online at the time of writing, and what lessons can we learn from it in 2026? Right, so this part is going to be long. It's hard to explain how important and how impressive the Radeon VII is without discussing how long and far GCN itself had come as a marker architecture. The Radeon VII came with the final full GCN revision, GCN 5.1, which added a few new rapid-packed 16-bit instructions, a few DOT instructions to the set, and new global and scratch-read-write operations. Niceties to be certain, but mostly improvements for compute work, which, knowing the Instinct MI50 is the card the 7 is based off of, it certainly makes sense. More relevant for gaming, the 7 is also closely related to the GCN 5.0 generation, which was a massive overhaul of the capabilities of the compute unit, the way it handled memory, and a strong focus on pumping up the rapid-packed math functions to a near absurd degree. The big thing for gaming was the introduction of primitive shaders, allowing for much more flexible rendering, potentially reducing power consumption and render overhead, and yet, it never seemed to make its way to the drivers. So, thanks, AMD. No fine wine to be found there, it seems. Obviously, the introduction of HBM2 was a huge step up over GCN 4 as well, allowing for, frankly, absurd amounts of data to be pushed across the memory bus. In fact, on the Radeon VII, it has a whopping 16 gigabytes of HBM2 across an absolutely ridiculous 4096-bit bus, letting this GPU have its memory run wild at a 1 terabyte per second speed. This cannot be overstated how overkill it was for gaming, particularly in the heyday of the 7. This is a number you wouldn't be too surprised to see on modern-day ultra-high-end Halo products like the much more recent and much more powerful RTX 4090, nearly 3 years later on a Halo-class card. Also relating to gaming, GCN 5 has moved to tile-based rasterization, granting a huge leap in efficiency, the awesome power to match what NVIDIA's Maxwell processors had years ago. No. Perhaps what the 7 had over the older GCN 4 cards is its ability to crunch massive amounts of math and look stunning doing it. It's no secret the Radeon 7 was a Hail Mary stopgap solution until RDNA was ready for prime time. It shares so much with the Enterprise Instinct MI50, it's basically identical, aside from a slight bump to its clock speeds to the tune of around 50 MHz, and a mild reduction to its float-point 64 math capabilities to just a quarter speed, compared to the Instinct's half speed, which matters none to almost everyone, except for scientists, mass financial traders, and certain AI workloads. That aside from these few differences, they're identical. AMD touted a few games such as Far Cry 5 and Wolfenstein 2 that use the rapid packed math capabilities of GCN 5, but nary a word has even been whispered about it since 7 launched. As far as gaming is concerned, it was another classic AMD misstep. It's really a shame, since it really did seem to help a lot in these games, rendering things like air and ocean physics with very little overhead when compared to traditional techniques. The hope is, all the improvements before the 7 was a twinkle in Lisa Su's eye, will allow it to thoroughly trounce its rivals and keep up with more modern cards and architectures. The Radeon 7 seems to get its name from two different places. The Roman numeral for 7, a V and 2 lines, representing the shiny new 7nm manufacturing node the GPU is etched with, and also V2 for Vega 2. Because deep down, the Radeon VII is a Vega 64, with a few compute units shaved off, dropping to 60 total, and a heap more clock speed to go along with it, boosting all the way to 1802 MHz, or more realistically 1750 MHz. Couple that with the power and space efficient HBM2 that Vega is well known for, but in 16GB and 4096-bit flavors, calling it Vega 2 isn't too far off from what it is. Pairing these specs to Vega 64, the 7's direct predecessor, with 64 compute units, 8GB of HBM2 on only a 2048-bit bus with a slower boost clock of 1546 MHz, and the 7 seems massively more powerful, excluding the few missing compute units, seemingly cut out for yield reasons, very unfortunately. Curiously, the 7's memory clocks were ever so slightly higher at a solid and flat 1 GHz, while the Vega 64's HBM2 clocks at 945 MHz. A difference of only 5.8%, but hey, every bit counts, right? Surely all these improvements and boosts will let the 7 skip the follies of the Vega 64 and thoroughly trounce its Nvidia rival, right? Right? All GPUs are stock in these respective videos, short of whatever OC the board vendor decided to put onto it, so this should be indicative of what you could see from any card you purchased today. For a more in-depth look at squeezing every bit of performance out of these cards, stay tuned for the Unleashing series, where I take cards to the reasonable extreme to eke out as much life from these cards as possible. Starting off with the Passmark suite of tests, the Radeon VII scores 833 in the 2D test. What in the world? Am I misreading that? No? Why is it nearly 20% worse than the Fury? Despite retests to try and prove otherwise, the card truly seems to struggle in the 2D benchmark, for reasons I can't seem to quite figure out besides the driver seemingly having a bug that affects this set of tests. Narrowing it down, the card seemed to struggle when working with scalable vector graphics and filters the most. It seems that certain settings relating to VSync, low latency display tech, or other display monitoring settings can cause this. The fact that it bothered no other card I've tested is still quite strange, so we'll be leaving this bit in. Moving onwards with some trepidation, 2 to 3D scores show a return to something much more reasonable, with the Radeon VII hitting 16,104 points. This places it well above the Fury and Fury Nano, and within a few percentage points of the RTX 3060 12GB. The compute scores, however, are a bit disappointing, to be honest. It more than doubled what the Furies could manage, but it's also well short of the 3060 here. It might be this specific test favoring the Empire architecture, but it doesn't bode particularly well for the Radeon. It's worth noting that, owing to its workstation pedigree, the Radeon VII performs exceptionally well in financial and scientific workloads, mostly thanks to that rapid packed math baked in. While I myself don't have a way to test these capabilities, TechGauge tested the 7 in Sci Software Sandra 2018 to give weight to how impressive the card performs using these workstation tasks. Compared to its competitors, the 7 nearly wiped the floor with everything, sometimes even including the RTX Titan, a no mean feat considering the absolute massive price difference between these two. Shifting back to general graphic tasks in firmware 2, at 1080p, the Radeon VII hits 8.5 thousand points, or around 143 frames per second on average. This places the 7 around the RTX 2070 Super area, which is about where I'd expect it to land, even if I am disappointed it can't do a bit better here. At 40p, it scores 6.1 thousand points, or 102 FPS, which places it well above the 2070 Super. In fact, it slightly outpaces the RX 7600. The non-XT model, which uses less power and has ray tracing, It's still a win, even if it's one tinged with ums and but actuallys. The 7 needs it, okay? And speaking of wins, at 4K, the 7 climbs its way to 3.4 thousand points, or 57 frames on average, letting it match the likes of the RTX 3070 and the RX 6700 XT. A truly mighty showing for such an older card, and a result that seems to flex the power of that HPM and the massive parallelism of the old GCN flagship. After Furmark, I ran the Firestrike Extreme test to see how the Radeon handles older DX11 titles. While 11 certainly isn't the newest graphics API anymore, it's where the majority of games currently reside, particularly older titles. Scoring 13.2 thousand points here, the 7 shows it has the chops to match or beat the RTX 3060, even if it can't quite hit the highs of the 2080, its main competitor. In Time Spy, more of the same, the 7 marks 9.4 thousand points, where it gets more soundly beat by the RTX 2080, but it matches more entry-level modern cards. Rounding out the synthetic benchmarks, we have Unigen's Superposition, in both 1080p Extreme and 4K optimized formats. In the 1080p test, the 7 hits 5,487 points, putting it nearly 1,000 points behind its main competitor, the RTX 2080. In 4K, it's once again more of the same, with the 7 reaching 7,571 points, only scraping the coattails of the 2080, which manages to get to 8.9 thousand points on average. Yikes. Let's hope gaming's a little better for this old flagship.
We really built Radeon VII for gamers, and these are the cream of the crop. The folks that want high frame rates when playing at the highest quality visual settings.
In gaming, I hope the 7 will shine somewhere the benchmarks haven't shown yet. Maybe some hidden trick up its sleeve or an instruction set being utilized that lets it really stretch its legs or use that ultra speedy HBM2. We start off with a Dolphin benchmark where we upscale Super Mario Galaxy to 4K with 8x SSAA to really put the heaviest load possible on the card, almost perhaps one of the harder Wii titles to properly emulate at full speed. I have the Vulkan renderer on with hybrid Uber shaders enabled as well to give this modern card a good platform to work on. Here we see the 7 managed 35.6 frames on average, with 1% lows dropping to 20.7 frames. Not an awful way to play, considering all you would need to do to make it run at a much smoother 60 is to turn down or off SSAA, which is very taxing in particular and one I try to shy away from in most circumstances. In this particular case though, I really wanted to make the card work to hit that 60 FPS limit, and this certainly does that. In Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, a game that originally launched on the PS5 and can utilize many of the new and shiny DirectX 12 Ultimate features, we have 1080p, 1440p, and 4K all at high with no ray tracing, since most cards on this channel won't be tested with ray tracing, at least for the foreseeable future. Starting off with the 1080p results, the Radeon reaches all the way to 80.1 FPS with 1% lows at 9. Not really sure why the 1080p results performed like this, even after I went back and rebench to see if it was oddity, but no, it happened whenever it went to load after the main intro animation into gameplay every time. Weird. Seems to be more an issue with my particular drive not hitting speeds this game wanted. The averages are the thing to look at the most here. 80 is perfect, with most hitches only coming from loading new assets in, which I can't really blame on the GPU. At 1440p, we're dropping down to 49.5 FPS with 1% loads of 26. 4K results are a bit rougher, with the 7 only reaching 28.5 FPS with 1% loads of 0.2. Ugh. Despite the large frame buffer and 11GB of such being used running at such a high speed, the Radeon just can't seem to catch its breath here no matter how loud its 3 fans get. Moving to Slime Rancher 2, a game that's both relatively lightweight yet breathtaking at times with its visuals, we'll be seeing how the card can handle open world games. No ray tracing or DX12 Ultimate features to speak of here, just good old rasterization. Starting with 1080p high, the averages come up to 112.8, with 1% lows hanging close to 71 at 70.8 FPS. This is incredibly playable, and this is true going into 1440p, where the Radeon hits 72.2, with lows going down to 57.6. This is enough to lock to 60 FPS and have a very smooth, good experience. Going on to 4K, the 7 starts to show its age, with averages only reaching 37 FPS, with lows squeaking just past 21, giving a console-like experience. I'd recommend turning down a few settings if you're dead set on playing at 4K, and turning it down to medium over high. It's hard to argue with how pretty the game is at 4K, so I can understand wanting to keep it there. Overwatch 2, or now just Overwatch, is a lightweight team-based FPS that uses its cartoony style to keep the game looking good without tons of effects, much to its benefit. As such, even at 4K Ultra, it stays at a very playable 59.7 FPS with lows going down to 47.3. At 1440p Ultra, averages more than double, going all the way up to 126 and lows only hitting 58.7, an excellent result. At 1080p, the average grows to 159.7, with lows sitting at 59.7. While still higher than 1440p, this small upwards movement seems to point out 1440p being the sweet spot for the old flagship here. Setting up the results of the short list of games, it seems Radeon 7 is still decent at 1440p if you can settle for medium settings, if you're wanting a smoother 60 FPS that is. And despite that large and fast VRAM and all the talk of parallelization in the world, 4K is solidly out of this card's wheelhouse nowadays. Vulkan will usually be your best friend since it can take better advantage of that high core count, but DX11 is still fully usable here. It's also worth noting how loud this card can get at stock. Even with 3 fans and a chunky cooler, this thing regularly sounds like a plane taking off, leaving it not far off from what the old blower style cooler sounded like. You know, I couldn't imagine a more perfect card to represent all of GCN than this one right here. A cut down, ultra compute card with gaming thrown at it to buy time for something better. The Radeon 7 was a culmination of a lot of bets on AMD's part over many years, and with lots of missteps and victories on the way. With its weirdly high amount of VRAM, a reference design that struggles to stay quiet and cool, and a jack of all trades approach to compute strength, it really is a culmination of what GCN could do. AMD made GCN to fight Nvidia on compute after Kepler and Fermi smoked the old Terascale cards, where it performed heroically, culminating with 7 with number crunching capabilities that would make some multi-$1,000 GPUs blush even today. However, the issue came from the other half of what they were asking of the architecture. Gaming. GCN never seemed to be able to match Nvidia in gaming, and especially not in the same power envelope. They ended up pinning a lot of hopes on Vulkan to utilize the asynchronous compute strength of GCN for gaming, and while it did help massively, especially compared to DX11, it was too little, too late. Comparing the 7 to the RTX 2080 shows a toss-up in most cases, but is that really good enough? Is barely trading blows with less features and the same price worth it? Yeah, the 7 had HBCC and monstrous packed math capabilities, but really this card never exceeded its 16GB frame buffer, even when you try, at least in most games where you can get playable performance out of the poor thing, and basically no games use the math capabilities the 7 offered. Perhaps more damning than its performance was its price. But really, depending on your workflow, the 7 was an awesome deal. $700 for all this VRAM and monster number crunching? Sign me and the rest of the compute and crypto industry up. But the ask from AMD was more so $700 for a gaming graphics card with no RTX, no AI cores, and slightly lower real-world gaming performance than the other big choice, the RTX 2080, all while pulling more power. Who would buy that? Well, me for one, but not too many people. It sold very poorly for all the mentioned reasons, but also it's just general lack of availability. Because, oh yeah, this bad boy needs something else to hold it down, with it being a paper launch in most parts of the world. Rumor put it at around 5,000 units total, a number AMD denies, but probably not too far off. Taking into account everything the Radeon VII was and is, what did AMD end up learning from it? I'd argue they learned to finally split the compute and gaming focuses into two distinct product lines and designs, to throwing everything in the kitchen sink in to try and trounce their green rival. This is most obvious when, just a few short months later, the RX 5700 XT came out, utilizing the much more gaming-focused RDNA architecture. It matched the Radeon VII or beat it in many games while sipping less power and costing less to boot. Yes, RDNA wasn't as good for production or professional work, but that's where the new CNDNA cards came in, carrying GCN DNA into a new product line. So, the Radeon VII's all alone in its product line. The lonely king of GCN. 7 was truly a stopgap, a desperate filler to have something to compete on shelves while RDNA kept cooking in the foundry. But I do think that the Radeon VII was an excellent send-off to all the years of GCN before it, and it deserves its title as the last shining star. May it shine on gorgeously for many years to come.